First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share a few of my thoughts. And I'd like to also point out that the theme of the session is absolutely topical and relevant. The Indian power system is going through the phase of transition, not only Indian power system, but I think the whole power system of many countries and almost all the countries are going through that transition. Energy transition basically refers to the energy sector shift from fossil-based system of energy production and consumption to renewable energy sources like wind and solar, as well as energy storage and batteries. The increasing penetration of renewable energy into the energy supply mix and improvements in energy storage are the key drivers of such energy transition. Now, such energy transition addresses the twin challenges of climate change and energy security in one go. Renewable energy sources are enabling countries to move away from fossil fuel-based energy sources and also strengthen their energy security and achieve greater energy independence by harnessing the available renewable energy resources. However, it is well recognized that there has to be a conducive and a facilitative policy and regulatory ecosystem in place, not only to facilitate, but also to accelerate such energy transition. The Indian power sector has been traditionally coal dominated. However, the generation mix has been changing very rapidly. The International Energy Agency in India Energy Outlook 2021 has projected that coal's current share of 16% in generation will drop to 34% by 2040, and share of solar, wind, and other renewable resources would go up. However, it was understood that the structure of the Indian market was not devised to suit large-scale integration of RE, which are very intermittent in nature. Low level of investors' confidence, low flexibility in the system, lack of framework to promote RE generation required urgent regulatory interventions to boost the RE-related investment. The situation provided an opportunity for the regulator to make structural changes in Indian power market and to seize upon the opportunity for propagating energy transition. The focus was clear: to provide necessary environment for RE generation so that RE generation and storage technologies become competitive and self-sustainable and is not dependent on subsidies. Energy transition entails large-scale intermittent renewable energy into the system. Recognizes this, CRC has taken a number of initiatives in this regard. These measures have helped in propagation of RE generation in the country. I would like to highlight a few of the regulatory framework developed or is being developed by the Commission that has placed India firmly on the path of energy transition. The CRC had notified regulation on renewable energy certificate, REC, in fulfillment of its mandate to promote renewable sources of energy and development of RE market in electricity. The RECs are traded at national level through the power exchange. The REC framework seeks to address the mismatch between availability of the RE resources and requirement of the obligated entities to meet their RPO. It encourages RE capacity addition in the states where there is potential for RE generation, as the REC framework seeks to create a national level market. The Commission, in order to provide additional revenue for short transactions of RE power, has approved the introduction of the Green Term Ahead Market, GTAM, as it is called, GTAM contracts on the power exchange, which has started from 1st September 2020. It is envisaged that the introduction of GTAM platform would lessen the burden on RE states and incentivize them to develop RE capacity beyond their own RPO obligations limit. This would promote RE merchant capacity addition and help in achieving RE capacity addition target of the country. On one hand, GTAM will benefit buyers of RE through competitive prices and transparent and flexible procurement. And on the other hand, it will also benefit RE sellers by providing access to pan-India market. Energy scheduled through GTAM contract shall be considered as deemed RPO compliance of the buyer. Ancillary services are support services to maintain the power system reliability and support its primary function of delivering energy to customers. These are deployed by the system operator over various time frames to maintain the required require the balance between the aggregate generation and load. The CRC has recently floated the draft regulations for market-based procurement of ancillary services. It is expected that ancillary services procurement through the market mechanism would promote new and innovative technology while taking care of balancing requirement due to intermittent sources of power like wind and solar. It is well known that storage technologies can provide energy into the system within a few seconds of the receipt of the signals. Thus, the ancillary service regulations are expected to provide market mechanism for propagation of storage technology, demand response, and RE generation. Thermal generation in India has traditionally been mandated to maintain a technical minimum standard of 75%. However, for rapid integration of intermittent RE, flexibility in the thermal generation is necessary. Thus, CRC has amended the grid code and which provides for technical minimum of 50% in case of thermal generating units with corresponding compensation mechanism for deterioration of the heat rate, auxiliary energy consumption, oil support in excess of normative parameters. This is aimed at providing flexibility to respond to the needs of the variations in demand, RE generation, etc., and also to ensure that the thermal generators are insulated from possible losses they may have to due to changes in the technical minimum. Efforts are also being made to utilize existing hydro and gas generation less during the day and more during the peak hours wherever possible. And wherever possible, the coal plants under 2-shift operation for evening peak support and pump or battery storage or both as flexible generation resources to ensure resilient and flexible system. Pilot studies under Greening the Grid program have been carried out to explore various strategies for flexibilization of the thermal generator by changes in operational practices and retrofitting. It is expected that these measures would incentivize flexibility in the existing generation fleet, which would help energy transition. A digital grid supported by a two-way communication could provide insight and control into the operation, empowering utilities to partner with end consumer and better respond to disruptive challenges. With bidirectional flow of data and information, load forecast and demand side management can be made more efficient, especially in the scenario of ambitious RE integration into the national grid. The smart capabilities required for a digital grid involvement smart meters, analytics, and big data, digital platforms, IT/OT integration, among other things. Several foundational policy and institutional and regulatory measures to support smart grid development are under implementation. It is expected that smart grid, which provides better insight on real-time basis on the grid conditions and RE generation, would further help in enhancing RE integration in the grid. The importance of energy storage, a promising technology that has proven its utility for grid stability, green hydrogen, and other technologies like carbon capture, utilization, can help in decarbonizing Indian grid, and it has been well recognized. Due to the very short response time, the energy storage is expected to play a major role as provider of secondary services. I have already mentioned that the proposed ancillary services regulations of CRC are expected to provide a favorable market mechanism for propagation of storage technology. In addition, the government of India has indicated plans to call for bids for setting up around 4,000 megawatt hour of grid scale battery storage system at regional load dispatch centers. Green hydrogen will be an unique energy vector that can help enable deep decarbonizations of many sectors such as transportation, industry, and power. A broad-based research, development, and demonstration program on hydrogen energy and fuel, focusing on addressing challenges in production of hydrogen from renewable energy sources, its safe and efficient storage, and its utilization for energy as transport applications through combustion and fuel cells has shown promising results. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage is a process that captures carbon dioxide emissions from sources like coal-fired power plants, and either reuses it or stores it, so it will not enter the atmosphere. Through CCUS, though CCUS is far from becoming the mainstream in near future in India at least, the government of India and the Indian industry are trying to understand the technologies, techno-economic feasibility and scalability better. India is also leading very aggressively with targets and accelerating sustainable mobility in transport sector with National Electric Mobility Mission 2020. Having recognized that energy transition is inevitable and recognizing that the policy and regulatory frameworks need to be put in place to facilitate and accelerate it, there are certain challenges which are associated with the energy transition. We call it energy trilemma, which is very real challenge, which means a trade-off amongst three conflicting challenges: ensuring energy security, providing energy equity, which means accessibility, access to all affordable and clean energy, and achieving environmental sustainability. So the biggest challenge for a developing country like India is moving towards decarbonization and at the same time providing and ensuring access to secure, reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy to its citizens, and meeting the developmental aspirations of vast majority of the population. This, it is not a trade-off, but the challenge is striking that fine balance between the environmental concerns and economic development. Therefore, it is important to create conditions for transition with least adverse impact on the economic development goals. The transition and decarbonization of power sector has a cost. Nothing comes in free. The issue is how much can be absorbed by the electricity utility, distribution utilities without compromising on the viability of running the business and without disrupting the continuity of the supply, and how much can be passed on to the consumers, considering the fact that large majority of the population, especially in the rural areas, may not be able to afford to absorb the same. In short, for energy transition and decarbonization of economy, there is a need for more and faster deployment of large-scale solar and wind power, ensuring at the same time energy security and reliability. There is also a need to explore new fuels such as liquid biofuels, hydrogen. Energy efficiency and carbon sequestration would also play a critical role in moving towards decarbonization. Market and regulation must support the access of new technologies and their providers, and flexible enough to accommodate emerging technologies as they reach maturity. At the same time, a fine balance between environmental concerns and economic development needs to be maintained. I'm sure the deliberation in these conferences on these issues, challenges, will throw a lot of insights and answers to the problems that both the regulators, policymakers, and all the stakeholders face in day-to-day implementation and going along with the energy transition. Once again, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me and permitting or giving an opportunity for me to share few of the thoughts. I'm sure your deliberations will be fruitful. My best wishes to the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. P.K. Pujari. I'm sure your talk sets the tone really for the panel discussion, which is to follow immediately. And as I introduce the panelists, we have 6 panelists with us. I'll just quickly introduce them in short, and then we go ahead with the panel discussions. We have with us Mr. KVS Baba, CMD of POSOCO, as Chairman and Managing Director of Power System Operation Corporation of India Limited, has a diversified experience of 33 years in the power sector and extensive exposure in grid operations, EHV transmission systems. He's an electrical and electronics engineer, has been actively associated with large-scale integration of renewable energy, bringing in frequency controls, introduction of ancillaries, etc. He has been a qualified system operator and has also obtained specialist level certification in regulatory framework in the Indian power sector. He has been very active in collaborative efforts with the state load dispatch centers through forum of load dispatchers and knowledge dissemination across all the stakeholders. We welcome Shri V.K. Singh, Chairman and Managing Director of the Northeastern Electricity Power Company, NEEPCO, Mr. VK Singh obtained his Bachelor of Electrical Engineering from the Regional Engineering College, now NIT Durgapur, in May 1983, and a Master's in Electrical Engineering from IIT Kharagpur in December 84. At present, he is the Chairman and Managing Director of NIPCO Limited, a mini Ratna under the Government of India Ministry of Power. He was appointed as Director Technical of NIPCO in March 2016 and was appointed as CMD in September 2019. NIPCO is the single largest power producer in the Northeast with an installed capacity of 2057 megawatts, supplying more than 50% of the power requirement of that area. Many power projects are in the pipeline, including the mega 3750 megawatt Siang Upper Hydro project in Arunachal Pradesh. Prior to his assignment in NIPCO, he was the Executive Director at National Hydro NHPC and has served in various capacities in NHPC for over 31 years, where he was responsible for design, construction, operation, maintenance of around 7 large hydropower plants. He has designed 7 major hydropower projects of NHPC as the design group head. He was head of plant for 4 major operational hydro plants as chief engineer in charge and general manager in Himachal Pradesh, J&K, Uttarakhand. As part of his work, he is extensively trained in France, Austria, Canada, Germany, and Spain at various points in time in areas of detailed design and engineering of hydro generators, testing of static excitation system, turbine model testing, high voltage testing, GIS integration, and integration of renewables in the grid. In NHPC, he was responsible for timely and successful filing of around 26 tariff petitions with the CERC as General Manager Commercial. With this wide exposure in both technology and commerce, we have with us Mr. VK Singh, CMD NIPCO, as one of the panelists. We also welcome Sanjay Sharma, Executive Director Solar of SECI. As we all know, SECI has been set up to speed up solar capacity addition in country. Apart from this, he has been a member of many committees, unified bidding guidelines. He is responsible for unified bidding guidelines for the RE sector, convener of the RPO committee, and as per decision of the management. After completing BTech in June 1988, he joined L&T ECC Group, headquarters Chennai, and then MK Structures, Ghaziabad, before joining Power Grid Corporation of India in 1993. Associated for 23 years approximately, wherein he worked in the commercial department, project monitoring department, contracts, and in various capacities before joining SECI in September 2015. In SECI, he has headed the contracts division, solar division, wind division, simultaneously in the past, now looking after implementation of all projects related to the solar, new and emerging technologies like green hydrogen and others. His achievements in REC, regional renewable energy include received personal commendation title Certificate of Recognition for services in the development of renewable sector in India through transparent and investor-friendly competitive process from Movement des Entreprises de France, MEDEF, International Paris, and the French Business Confederation at a ceremony hosted in Paris. His relentless efforts during COVID-19 was recognized by the UN Secretary General in his compliment. India is a good example of solar auctions amidst the pandemic, and in India, only SECI has successfully conducted reverse auctions during the pandemic for 11,600 megawatts of renewable energy capacity, which was awarded from April to July 2020. So we have this wonderfully experienced Mr. Sanjay Sharma as one of our panelists. We have Dr. Dilawar Singh, Managing Director and CEO. He is the founder and promoter of Sun Brilliance Group, which is a leading solar power projects developer and independent power producer. Dr. Dilawar Singh is a well-known solar energy expert and highly regarded authority in the solar PV industry. Dr. Singh has over 40 years of experience in the field of sustainable energy industry. He has a PhD in solar energy, 1994, from Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi. His areas of specialization include solar photovoltaics, solar thermal energies, wind and mini and micro hydropower, energy efficiency, energy audit, greenhouse gas emission, climate change issues, and carbon footprint, as well as he has a good understanding of the knowledge of other renewable energy sources, such as bio, wave, tidal, geothermal, and hydrogen energies. Dr. Singh was conferred the adjunct professor in 2007 in recognition of his contribution to the Mudrok University, Perth, Western Australia. He served as a board member of Greening Australia from 2007 to 9 for 5 consecutive terms, he was the president of Australia-India Chambers of Commerce. Dr. Singh joins us as one of our panelists today. We welcome him. We have Mr. Christian Valdez Carter. Christian Valdez Carter takes over as the head of innovation in Norway's operations in India from January 2021. Christian comes from the role as CEO of CCB Subsea in Bergen. He has experience from both real estate and the oil and gas sector, and also holds a number of board positions, including the West Negesad, the Kirkins Maritime Park, and the Flobanen. Christian is a lawyer educated from the University of Bergen. He has completed the Slotstrand program for young leaders at AFF and holds a master's degree in the transition and innovation management from the Norwegian School of Economics, NHH. We welcome Mr. Christian Valdez Carter. We have also as a panelist, Mr. A.K. Jha, the former CMD NTPC as well as Director Technical NTPC. As a graduate in mechanical engineering from Birla Institute of Technology, Sindri in Ranchi. He's done his LLB from the Delhi University. He joined NTPC in 1977 as an executive trainee. And this is a classic case of having risen from the ranks to be the head of the organization. He started his career with the early days in Singrauli, 5 into 200 megawatt subcritical units. And till date, those old units still operate and perform to the design guarantee conditions of those times. Of course, it wouldn't match with the technological advancements that we've done today. Mr. Jha has a rich and varied experience of 38 years in NTPC in all the areas of power project as design, engineering, project planning, monitoring, project construction, and management. He joined NTPC board in July 2012 as Director Technical. He was responsible for initiation and investment approval of a large number of projects across NTPC. Besides being a whole-time director in NTPC, Sri Jha is also the was the chairman of the board of directors of NASL, a JV company between NTPC and Alstom, now renamed as NGSL, and PVUNL Patratu Vidyut Utpadan Nigam Limited, a subsidiary of NTPC. He was also part-time director of BIF PCL, a JV company of NTPC and the Bangladesh Power Development Board. He is also a member of the expert committee constituted by the Government of India to determine the normative values of parameters of operation of atomic power stations for fixing of nuclear power tariff. And he was holding the additional charge of CMD NTPC from September 15 to February 16. We welcome Mr. A.K. Jha, who is having such a wonderful exposure across the entire energy value chain. And of course, I do welcome my colleague, Mr. Arnada Prasad Samal, who will also be one of the moderators of today's panel discussion. Power plant professional with more than 30 years of experience in various fields, amalgamation of excellent academics, having a university gold medal in mechanical engineering to his credit, and varied experience in power plant design and engineering, as well as operation and commissioning. A complete power plant professional who started with commissioning the most crucial activity of the power plant execution. He was instrumental in commissioning our 500 megawatt generators, once through tower type boilers, steam turbine generators, including auxiliaries, and has worked in various capacities in the project engineering division, at present heading the turbine systems group. He's played a key role in setting up many projects of unit sizes ranging from 200 megawatt subcritical units to 800 megawatt supercritical units. I do welcome Mr. Samal to join me and host this program and also be a moderator of the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, may I request Mr. Samal to kindly begin the proceedings of this panel discussion.
Thank you, Prasenjit, for this nice introduction. Good afternoon. I once again welcome all the panelists to this discussion, that is Energy Transition, the Pathways, this aptly chosen by the organizers. Before that, let me introduce also Prasenjit Pal. He's an electronics engineer from Nagpur University and joined NTPC in 1988 as an executive trainee, and has more than 30 years of experience in power plant engineering and project management as well. including renovation and modernizations. Presently, he is General Manager Projects in the NTPC Telangana, responsible for complete project development, construction management, and multi-contract coordinations, external stakeholder management to deliver 2 into 800 megawatt ultra supercritical power projects, including 1.2 megawatt of solar power. Worked in international programs as well, like Asia Pacific Partnership for Clean Development of Climate for reduction of carbon dioxide emission in coal-based projects.
Your voice is not clear.
Samal, thoda loud.
Yeah. Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So let us start the discussions further. The theme was, as I said, aptly chosen by the organizations discussion for the given scenario, world scenario. The world is under energy transitions, as all of us know. All the countries are striving to reach the destination called net zero. Whether it is achievable or not, we are yet to see. Different countries are at different phases of these transitions. It is obvious that the solution is the renewable to the maximum extent. To what extent, it is still debatable. However, all renewable energies comes with a variability, and the challenges is the grid management, either by storage technology like batteries, pumped storage, gravity storage, thermal storage, green hydrogen, etc. All these things have already been stressed upon by our CMD and TPC, as well as Mr. Prabhu and Mr. Pujari also. So these things are going to be the future of power generation. So with this variability, we cannot do away with the thermal energy also. The cyclic nature of this variable solar or the renewable energies. This thermal source is going to bridge the gap till this system is self-sufficient, like we have enough technology for storage technologies and other this thing. It gives rise to issues like cycling cost, flexibility issues of the old power plants, e-mobility, carbon capture and usage, and introduction of alternate fuels like green hydrogen and methanol, ammonia, as already we have discussed earlier in this program. Also provides, India is also taking very positive role in this regard. Be it INDC, aggressive renewable addition targets to support policy interventions to the success of this noble cause to protect our Mother Earth. Cooperation and support of all stakeholders is required. With the above background, let us start our discussion with our eminent panelists. So to begin with, let me go to Mr. Baba, the chairman of POSOCO. Sir, do you think India has chosen the right path and has put up its best foot forward in this direction of transition?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you once again for making me one of the panel member. I think that Sri Pujari's chairman CRC has already mentioned that a lot of activity has been taken up for facilitating renewables and energy transition. First of all, country has given its commitment to clean environment, climate. So whatever path you take, whatever one step that you move towards it is a right path. There is nothing like right or wrong, in my view. So your question is, has it chosen the right path? There is no right or wrong. Everything is whatever is aiming to achieve the clean climate is right path, in my view. So therefore, maybe one step, maybe what do you call, one thing, another important thing, we have to take all the systems in available technology, available policy, everything, we have to take everything along and then move towards the final goal of the cleaner clean climate, or for the ultimate human being he has to live. So that is, in my view, whatever government of India has taken, they are all right steps, definitely. And it is in the direction of the decarbonization. Yes, there are various technical issues. Yes, we have to keep on happening, keep on cajoling keep on conversing and then converging. That is the most important.
Yeah, thank you for your views. Means there is no right or wrong in this direction. You have to try and keep on experimenting also. With this same note, Mr. Sharma, what additional effort is required for India to achieve this aggressive target?
Sir, energy sector goals for 2030 have generally been defined in SDG 7. One is ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Second is increase substantially the share of the renewable energy in the global energy mix. And third is double the global rate of improvement of energy efficiency. So what you are telling that additional efforts, I think 65% of the greenhouse gas emissions are contributed by the energy sector itself, which mainly basically from one is transport sector, energy, second is electricity sector, and third is industrial processing, and that is basically heat. So additional efforts, we have to combine the framework and the regulatory efforts to start with, and to encompassing and inclusive kind of a regulatory framework, so that we can move forward and each and every aspect is taken care of. Right now we are focusing about only on the green energy itself. We are not focusing on the process part. We are not, of course, transportation sector. We are, yes, we have started and rightly started at the nick of the time, but yes, we need to achieve more. And what we are thinking that our Honorable Prime Minister has announced that 450 gigawatt of that renewable target for 2030. In my view, and as per the basic calculation I have, right now we have already achieved more than 200 gigawatt of maximum peak power, right? So if we say that 80% of the PLF or say CUF, so that requires at least 250,000 of megawatt of generation capacity that should be available all the time, right? And if we take the percentage from the normative growth, maybe 5% or say 6%, which requires an additional capacity of say 15,000 megawatt per annum on a normative basis. And if that is to be fulfilled by this renewable only, and if you take the CUF of say 30% itself, that accounts for 40,000 megawatt per annum increment, and that will surpass the 450 gigawatt capacity. So there is no need to make any efforts, but in the same case scenario wherein the thermals are operating, hydro is operating, only the additional part we have to fulfill through renewable, we will achieve our goal. So regulatory framework has to be in sync with the requirement.
Okay. Thank you. So that means we are in the right path, and only thing we have to do is not only focus on power, we have to focus on total energy as a whole, energy sector as a whole, like e-mobility or the other energy consuming process industries. We have to target on that, so that we achieve it comprehensively as a whole total country to focus with. So coming to Mr. Carter, I believe Norway is also in the same path. So what path has been followed by Norway, and how it is different? You have also fair knowledge of Indian market. So how it is different from Indian regulatory framework?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me here today. It is an honor to be part of a session and a panel so esteemed, and a pleasure to be given the opportunity to address this event. I would like also to start by saying that I think that India has done a great job. The total installed capacity, renewable capacity in India, excluding large hydropower, has now crossed the 100 gigawatt milestone. So we have gone from 10 gigawatts back in, I think it was in 2005, to 100 gigawatt today. And I think that this will be accelerated through the Indian government's proactive approach and looking at how the business sector has responded lately to this approach. I tend to remain quite optimistic. Now, going back to Norway, let me first just elaborate a bit on the situation in our country and how we plan to achieve our long-term goals with respect to an energy system that is sustainable, both environmentally and economically. So we have a very unique combination in Norway when it comes to energy resources. We are one of the world's biggest oil and gas producers. And at the same time, we have a domestic energy system that is based almost entirely on flexible hydropower. So more than 95% of our energy and electricity is renewable. So in many ways, we are in a different situation compared to India, but still we face the exactly same challenges and opportunities. That is, become more independent from oil and gas. For Norway, that means less dependent on oil and gas exports, and for India, less dependent on imports, and at the same time create new sustainable energy industries. So estimates indicate that half of our oil and gas resources remain to be produced, and currently Norwegian offshore suppliers, the ones that pretty much form the backbone of the industry, will experience large developments and strong activity the coming years. But alongside this, we have very ambitious goals and targets for not only cutting emissions, but also to create what we call green growth. And this is a huge task and involves the government as well as the industry, research community, and also parts of academia. And we have implemented several things that are bringing us in that direction, like carbon tax on emissions, but we're also very much stimulating the oil and gas industry to develop projects and key competence within zero or low carbon solutions. And at the same time, we're also taking advantage of our solutions and technologies within hydropower and the production of hydrogen, something that we have been doing for more than almost 100 years. So we have recently announced our own hydrogen strategy and subsequently our roadmap. And currently we have approximately or more than 50 different projects within hydrogen in more than 50 different locations across the whole country. And this involves more than 100 companies and the research institutions. And the projects include not only the production of clean hydrogen through electrolysis of water or blue hydrogen or even red hydrogen from biomass combined with CCS, but we're also developing infrastructure technologies and solutions for storage, distribution, and for applications of hydrogen like shipping and heavy industries. So, and that pretty much by applying incentives also on the demand side. So pretty much a very brief discussion, presentation of what the situation is in Norway. It is very exciting because this also very much contributes to the creation of new green supply industries and also new innovations and partnerships and the acceleration of development of other renewables like solar and especially in Norway, offshore wind, and also the emergence of a very strong value chain within batteries and energy storage with companies like Morrow and Corvus Energy and Beyonder. So it is a very, let's say, a holistic approach that involves pretty much the whole energy value chain and also very much the government and also through these platforms that enable public private partnerships.
Thank you for giving this background of Norway energy sector. That means every country has to be a customized solution because the situations are different, the demands are different, the requirements are different. So there is not a standard solution fit for all countries or all localities. That is what you mean to emphasize. Okay, thank you. Going to Dr. Singh, can you just give us a brief on Australian market also, whether there is on the same line?
Namaskar to everyone. So I'm from Perth right now. I've lived here last 29 years. I'm very much in the renewable energy field as for my description earlier. Now I'm involved in a green hydrogen project here. I will go to that one a little bit later. But I start from this. We are talking the transition from various energy sources. But if you have seen, this first we invented the coal almost 300 years ago. Then that was the first revolution in the energy sector. After that, we found the oil, and then we now found the renewable energy. But earlier two sources, revolution, we have seen that a lot of greenhouse gases coming out there. But now we are now looking for green revolution now. So that is there is no pollution at all, and all solar and wind and other sources of energy we are considering now. If you see in terms of this Australian, what the government is doing here. So here we are having four major parties, political parties, but two are really major. One is this Labour Party, but they are being supported time to time by the Green Party here. Another one is the Liberal Party, and they are the coalition of the National Party. But Labour Party is very pro for renewable energy here. And they come with their plan by 2050, they will have 100% transition to the renewable energy, clean energy sources. But recently, this Liberal Party, they also took the lead and they say, yes, we will go for by 2050 for renewable energy. But they were facing the revolution with their coalition partner of National Party. But only yesterday, the National Party also agreed to adopt the same thing by 2050. So now whole of Australia is going for clean energy sources by 2050. So either it is transport sector or it is the industrial sector, or mainly here what we are considering, because we have the plenty of sunshine like in India, and also the wind source. And the country-wise, you see the very small population-wise, only 25 million people here. So mainly we are considering for the export market. What we produce here, either we'll convert into hydrogen or we convert into ammonia, and then we export. So now recently, this lot of projects happened here. Almost 10 big projects announced here for green hydrogen, and we are one of them. So my company, this is Sun Brilliance Pty Limited. We initiated this project almost 3 years ago. And last year, we have appointed a EPC company from Spain, and we have recently completed the project design. So this is the project we are doing, the 3.1 lakh tons of hydrogen per year and about 8 lakh tons of ammonia. And mainly we are considering for export to Singapore, South Korea, and Japan. The estimated project cost for our project about $10.65 billion Australian dollars. So we are out of this 10 projects announced so far. We are in the more advanced stage than any other projects. Other people are still in doing the feasibility studies and all those things. We are hopeful to start our project sometime next year and complete by 2025. And then we export the ammonia, because right now no infrastructure ready for exporting the hydrogen. So we consider let's do first ammonia, and then we add on for liquefaction of hydrogen, and then we export. These are some of the just to I give you another example. Here is a company called ATCO. This is a Canadian company. They put a demonstration project a couple of years ago here in Perth, and that is they are using the solar energy for energizing the 20 to 50 kilowatts of electrolyzer. And now there are 20 cars in Perth running on hydrogen. And almost 10 years ago, we were having also the 3 Mercedes buses running for demo purpose here. So we are very much to this hydrogen, green hydrogen, and the government is supporting like anything. So with this, in 2019, the government of Australia, they come up with the hydrogen map. And after that, number of states, they set up their own hydrogen councils, and Western Australia is one of them. So they funded number of R&D projects and some demo projects and all this. So recently, 3 demo projects of 10 megawatt electrolyzers were financed, almost 60-70% of the cost of the projects. So they are right now under different stage of implementation. And also the government recently provided, just announced the grant of $1.3 billion for hydrogen projects. And out of that, they announced the $464 million right now. That grant is open and number of companies are looking for grant. And the grant is from $30 million to $70 million per person. So here the target of the government is to bring down the cost of the green hydrogen around $2 per kilogram. This is the brief from Australia.
Thank you for the background of Australia.
Yeah, Samal, as we see, integration of higher percentage of renewables is going to be a very country-specific, region-specific kind of a issue, a kind of a strategy based on the rainfall pattern, the atmospheric dust burden, the seasonal variations, the solar insolation, and so on and so forth. One of the major aspects of renewable integration in our part of the world is driven by the fact that we are in the monsoon region, wherein there is a particular rainfall pattern, and therefore the energy availability in different parts of the year is slightly different. Of course, we all know the popular textbook language which says that electricity is to be used when it is produced, but I believe that has now been driven to the extent of a myth, because we now have proven storage technologies which make this possible to produce energy at certain time of day and maybe use it at a totally different time of day. But availability of proven economically viable grid scale storage of various types become very important when we discuss any aspect or any issue related to integration of renewables into the grid to a very high percentage level. My question is to Mr. VK Singh. Sir, what do you think is the role of storage technology? How do you see the role of storage technology in India's endeavor to take this discussion forward? And do you think that without cheaper battery storage, it may not be possible to achieve the overall goal of renewable integration?
Thank you, Mr. Pal. Thank you for posing this question to me. And first of all, I really appreciate it's a good learning platform, platform for exchange of ideas. That I'm through and through. I have been working in hydro area for more than 36 years now. I'm into 37th year of my service, and all through in hydro. So it's great to learn about new hydrogen technology, integration methods, and of course I did some short-term course in Spain and Germany about integration of renewables in the grid, and where they were talking about hydrogen conversion and all these processes. Anyway, your question is very pertinent in context of hydro, and I'll be basically focusing my discussion on hydro. What I feel personally, and of course, most of the hydro professionals will feel the same way, is I have done some very rough comparison that is, of course, available with me, and where I have tried to compare the battery energy storage system, the pumped storage plant for balancing of grid and for facilitating integration of renewables in the grid, and the pondage-based storage, hydroelectric plants or other river plants, which lead to minimum displacement of the population from the reservoir area, minimum rehabilitation. So these three things are very much interlinked. I find still there is a very strong case for developing all the hydro potential in the country, and which is the unexploited potential as of now is more than 100,000 megawatts, 100 gigawatts in hydro alone. And none of them is having a pondage of less than 3 to 4 hours, and maybe up to 7 to 8 hours, 9 to 10 hours, like that, depending on the location, the geographic location, and the the geological area of the plant. I'd like to say, while this technology, I could visit the Battery Technology Center of Hydro-Quebec in Canada in June 2016, and I could see there were a lot of advancements are going on. And of course, I have a lot of hopes, expectation from new battery technologies. They are mature, they are growing at a very fast pace. Hydrogen is going very fast pace, but need of hydro in Indian context cannot be underplayed in any scenario. Like my 31 years in NHPC, I was involved in 7 major hydro plants, and in all aspects like design, construction, operation, and maintenance. And I started my career at 540 megawatt Chamera 1 of NHPC in Himachal Pradesh. It was being done by the team of SNC Acres of Canada, and they were basically involved in design and all construction aspects of the plant, including deployment of very advanced latest technology, everything. And it could be demonstrated very safely there that given all other constraints, it could be the real construction time which was available for that mega size plant was honestly 6 years. And the myth about very long gestation period of hydro plant could be very easily expelled. That plant has around more than 50 million cubic meter of storage, around 7 kilometer long headrest tunnel through a very fragile Himalayan zone where tunneling is difficult. There is underground power plant having 5-story building, and it makes big football grounds, around 75-meter high building and 130 meter long with 2 cables, main access tunnel of around 1 kilometer and 2.5 kilometer terrace tunnel system, which passes below the river after the water from the turbine is going out, flowing back to the river. So that is the complexity and the scale of the project. It could be easily demonstrated that despite many devastating floods, due to other reasons, the plant was still under construction. Despite so many environmental and other factors, despite local challenges, it could be done. The scale of deployment, the kind of mechanization which was adopted was successfully, that was the first case of accelerated hydropower development in India. That was the first project. It was a model project, and it could be done. And it was of an unseen scale in hydro construction, be it from aggregate production, and the aggregate production plant was set of 700 tons per hour capacity. Ropeway was able to carry this crushed aggregate from a distance of around 12 kilometer road distance through a 3.5 kilometer roadway at the pace of almost 350 meter cube per hour production capacity. And the dam having a concrete volume of around 1.4 million cubic meter could be constructed in less than 4 years. 8 spillways, 4 under sluices, huge intake structure, and so many other energy dissipation components. And that is the enormity of the project which could be done. Second in the series was Chamera 2 of NHPC. It was just immediate upstream of Chamera 1. Fortunately, I was involved there also. And that project could be commissioned in 4 years from the first date of the first blast of the HRT. So there are many, many examples. Why there are bad examples also. But it is my considered input. I'll not say a view only, but it's my considered input to the August gathering here, that technical challenges are completely surmountable. Completely. These are the basic political, on-ground and other challenges, environmental challenges, policy challenges, and decision-making challenges. that are making these sectors very complex, apparently complex. These are not complex. I can say with confidence, with my 36 years close and on the ground observation and on the ground association. I'll be touching on few more topics, like as of now, around more than 46,000 megawatt we have commissioned as per India's nationally determined contributions. As per Paris COP20, we have to add another around 26,000 megawatt by the year 2030. That makes it around more than 2,700 megawatt approximately every year for the next 9 years. That is our nationally determined contribution. That is what we have committed at Paris COP20. Commissioning 2,700 megawatt per annum hydro definitely is not a big task. All we need is enabling policy environment. And I'm very glad to inform this August gathering here that the present dispensation in the Ministry of Power is very supportive of these new interventions. Honorable Minister of Power, or respected Secretary Power, they have given us real free hand in terms of suggesting good policy interventions. And I'm glad to inform that 3 major policy initiatives are being drafted. I'm one of the co-authors there. One is, like, we are trying to say that at least if hydro, fortunately, even large hydro has been categorized as green source of energy at par with the solar power. Earlier, the power plants, hydropower plants, less than 25 megawatt were categorized as, renewable source. Absolutely, there were no logic. Now, any hydropower plant, irrespective of their size, is categorized as renewable source. That's a very good development. As per new hydropower policy intervention of 2018, enabling infrastructure which goes into making a hydropower plant, this being subsidized, and that subsidy is, I'll say, grant is to the tune of 1 crore per megawatt for the plants above 200 megawatt, and for the plants below 200 megawatt, where the economy of scale is small, is 1.5 crore per megawatt. This was dire necessity. I'll come back to economics of that also, why it is required. Thirdly, the waiver of interstate transmission charges. You'll be surprised to know now the interstate, Mr. Baba was in one of the 3 group members in the discussion. It varies, like it is typically if you take the weighted average, it is 1.3 to 1.4 rupees per kilowatt hour of energy transmitted. For example, I have commissioned a 600 megawatt plant called Kamen Hydroelectric Plant in Arunachal Pradesh last year. And the production cost is typically 4 rupees 50 paise per unit. That has around, the plant can cater in the lean season also 11 hours support to the grid at 600 megawatt. And if I run the plant in a customized manner, I can tweak the operation of the plant with the backup of the storage in the plant, which is 6 million cubic meter typically. On account of its very high head, we have great advantage. With the less discharge, we are able to produce 150 megawatt. It's a very high head power plant, it's around 530 meter head. It's a great advantage. You can say that is this in the leanest season also, leanest inflow season in the river, 600 megawatt I can produce for 10 hours you can take. So 6,000, it comes to 6,000 megawatt hour of battery, equivalent of battery, without any other associated complications. And the robustness of hydro machines, my engineers, the panelists, fellow engineers here, it's a salient pole machine. It brings enormous contribution to the grid stability, the power swing, and other parameters which are not to be seen with other sources. So I'm a strong votary of this, supporting this for very rapid development. And although our commitment is for, say, 30,000 addition of around 26,000 megawatt over the next 9 years, there is nothing wrong if you can exceed it. And with these enablers, it can be done. The greatest impediments were these 2. So we presented a case before the Power Ministry. The hydro is not less green in any manner. Rather, it is more green, less polluting, and it's very, very stable, highly flexible. In a matter of 3 minutes, typically, you can bring the machine from standstill to the full load operation. You can stop it within 1.5 to 2 minutes. You can vary the ramp up, ramp down. Load variation you can do in matter of just minutes and less than a minute. You have to just increase or decrease the wicket gate opening of the hydro turbines. So it is so flexible, so operable easily, and coupled with the reservoir backup, any amount of combination, any amount of customization is possible. And the benefits far, far outweigh the perceived complications in implementation of hydro projects. I'll touch upon 3-4 quick points because this subject is very close to my heart. As you rightly said, comparison of hydro with battery energy, in a way you are basically asking for a comparison between battery energy storage system and hydro. As on today, I can definitely say it far outweighs. It leads far ahead of that. If we monetize all the attendant benefits of hydro, all the attendant benefits, which are normally very much understated, taking a typical plant load factor of 50%, 50%, even 50% power plant load factor is a very attractive plant load factor. There are very attractive plants. And megawatt in terms of hydro, I'd like to clarify, most of you may already be knowing, but I would like to re-emphasize that megawatt does not indicate anything in a hydro plant. Nothing, I'll say. So a 60 megawatt plant, typically in Mizoram, which we have commissioned 2 years back, that has a storage of 1,450 million cubic meter and live storage of 750 cubic meter. It is 56 days battery. Without considering there is zero inflow in the reservoir, I can run the plant with the backup of storage for 56 days non-stop at 60 megawatt. It's a low head power plant. At the same time, there is a plant called Cumming, which has with 6 million cubic meter of storage. It can cater for good grid support for 10 hours at full 600 megawatt in the leanest possible season, that is January. And so these are the kind of variations possible. 3-4 other quick points. Of course, I was not very clear. I was really extensively traveling. I got very short remaining time, and I was just broadly clear about the theme of the discussion. I could have come with better preparation, but anyway, I'll give you a very quick brief about all those things. There is a plant, that Xi'an Upper project, that is 10,000 megawatt, 350 meter high dam. The typical advantage that is at international border, very close to international border with China, that has 9 billion cubic meter of storage, 9,000 million cubic meter. Even if China diverts water in the upstream as is being apprehended, it can sustain the river Brahmaputra round the year through the controlled releases from the dam. At the same time, if there is a flash flood in the upstream of the dam, it can do the flood moderation for more than 36 days. It can control the water level, flood water level at Guwahati between the range of 1.8 meter to 2.6 meter. That's a huge, huge moderation. And 350 meter high dams are, there are plenty of dams which have been made. The biggest challenge comes now. Now the major policy irritants have been removed by the Ministry of Power by way of announcing a grant for enabling infrastructure. In Cumming hydroelectric plant, I have made 120 kilometer access road from Tezpur Tawang Road. This was in a very virgin area. It was for our exclusive use. Later on, the whole public connected to that area is using that road. 120 kilometer. It is normal. It's not normally. It's a total greenfield road. Absolutely. And we have constructed 16 bridges on that road. Where do you see this kind of infrastructure being doled out to the local population free of cost? It is done as part of the project cost. Now, only thing which is the biggest thing is the scale and criticality of the risk-taking capability. And this comes by your sheer training on the ground. you are like on a warfield where we come across such risk day in and day out, and this trains our mind to take this risk. So the person who is really trained on the ground to face such challenges day in and day out, he's seasoned. He is really weathered to take such kind of risk.
So your points are well taken, sir. Your points are well taken. That means the hydro can replace other storage mechanisms like battery and all those things. So that needs to be, but we have to see the potential, the cost, and also, of course, you pointed out towards the socio-economic and political situations, all those things. So that is to be, that needs to be debated further. Whether
Mr. Samal, I'll take just one more minute because I was to touch upon that point.
Yeah, please.
That also, other things, the economic factors have already been taken care of. In one of the case studies, I presented a case on the lines of First Nations case in Canada. You for giving equity, it is just purely, I perceive it as a purely political problem. If the project affected families are offered share in the project, free equity, maybe 1 or 2% equity, they will be a very, very, forthcoming, I tell you, supporters of the project. They'll be participating in the project development. They will not see any kind of resistance. Land Acquisition Act 2013, that need to be slightly modified. That's not a very big deal if the nation really intends to do that. And making those local populations who are just giving their part of the land. And unlike major storage power plants, run-of-the-river power plants, there will be less rehabilitation and rehab settlement required. And by giving them 2%, 3% equity, they can be made very serious stakeholders. There will be persons who will be leading the project. So if there is a will, and that Ministry of Power is very much seized of these things, you will see large scale and rapid development happening there. And last point, I'm just summing up my discussion, is spontaneity and scale of decision and scale of risk taking. These two things, if they are taken together, departing from the other standard decision making, ways, I don't see any doubt in the way of construction of hydro. It can be done. We have demonstrated by commissioning 26 power plants in NHPC, more than 26, and another 15 under implementation. 9 we have commissioned in NIPCO. It is doable. That's the want of confidence. By saying this, I never mean to other renewable sources like wind and solar, battery energies, they are very much needed. And contrary to what some may understand, all I'm trying to say is this is very much complementary to those sources. How do you create other sources? Like how do you support other sources? So hydro is very much more the penetration of solar and wind. More you want this to cater to the variability and intermittency, more hydro you want. And this very much complementary. Wholeheartedly, this whole nation should support this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Definitely, VK Singh sir. Thank you so much. You've made a strong case for hydro for supporting the grid. While it is very, very attractive in the northern India, where the rivers are snow-fed, perhaps in southern India,
Can you hear me?
the situation may be slightly different,
Hello?
and therefore we may have to have a mix and match kind of a scenario, which means we'd have to look at all possible options. And my next question is to Mr. Carter. I understand all over the world, various laboratories are working on research and development in terms of the battery technology. Do you think sufficient effort and emphasis is being given to this research? And what, in your opinion, Mr. Carter, would be the cost graph of the battery storage in the near future, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years time scale, if I may ask?
Thank you. Thank you for a very good question. The last couple of weeks, I have been very fortunate to be working together with companies, Norwegian companies within battery and energy storage, and looking at their technology roadmaps with the implementation of significantly cheaper active materials. I think that we will see very promising developments when it comes to the price, not only of the production and manufacturing of batteries, but also the cost for the storage. So I think that we are seeing very promising developments, and this comes, of course, due to the ability to not only be working, let's say, more efficiently, but also have this kind of exploration approach to it, where they create new innovations, not only within the technology, but also within the efficient manufacturing, the recycling of material and reuse of excess heat, logistics, and so on and so forth. So I'm not, let's say, into depth when it comes to the pricing, but just to say that I'm quite optimistic when it comes to the pricing and to the cost for storage. But I think that this is just part of this giant puzzle, right? Or this extended energy value chain. I think that when looking at having this holistic approach to it, I think that we together can enable ourselves to get down the cost. Also within hydrogen, that has been very much in the headlines the last couple of years and months here in India. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I remain very optimistic.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Carter. I believe all over the world, people are looking at various technologies, and while the current lithium technology seems to be slightly expensive, if you look in terms of grid scale storage, perhaps sodium sulfur may have a better option. And of course, quite a few other technologies are under development. So I do agree with you that we need to look ahead with a very positive mindset, perhaps, and maybe very soon we'll have more economically viable battery technology, if I may say so.
Just to add very quickly that from Innovation Norway, we are also available. We have a grant that we give to companies, and just a month ago we awarded a company grants to develop cobalt-free batteries based on new technologies, LMNO technology, and so this is, going back to this public-private partnership. I think that to enable the battery industry to become more efficient and keep on innovating on the technology side, I think that it's important to give these kinds of incentives in terms of grants and also in some areas also within the fiscal area.
Yeah, definitely, Mr. Carter. Definitely the battery industry needs to be incentivized to look into more of research and more of innovation. My next question is to Mr. Sharma. Sharma Sahab, we've had a very strong case made for hydro as grid support element by Mr. VK Singh, and we have been discussing various issues with storage. What, in your opinion, are the other storage technologies that may have a potential of having an edge over battery storage, maybe?
Sir,
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you're audible, sir. You're audible.
I do see hydrogen as a good future storage technology, and may it be blended with the fuel, may it be blended, or it can be used as cells to produce electricity again. So that can be used for storage, and that can drive the electric vehicles. And as I have already told, that transportation sector approximately consumes 18% of the total energy sector. So if that can be used in transportation, that is very good.
Definitely. Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Yes, of
Prasenjit,
course.
I see Mr. Bhatnagar wants to ask something. Can you please type your question in the chat box, please? We'll take up the questions at the end. Yeah, please. Continue.
Okay. So if I may ask Dr. Dilawar Singh, from a expert perspective, we've discussed battery, we've discussed hydro, we've discussed hydrogen. if I were to ask you to, have a gaze at the crystal ball, maybe look into the future, what would you predict would be the way forward, and maybe which technology is likely to rule in the future and why?
Yeah, okay. Just now, you see the lithium batteries mainly used in the cars and also for storage purposes. The efficiency of those batteries are about 90%. And they degrade almost at the rate of 10% per year. That is the scenario with that. If you go for the hydrogen batteries, in the currently, their efficiency is around 50%. First you produce hydrogen and then you again generate power from there. The overall efficiency comes to around 50%. But now you have seen, and you can realize now, the efficiency of these electrolyzers are increasing. The same way, the electrolyzer is the opposite of the fuel cell. So the efficiency of both are the same. So if you multiply the efficiency of fuel cells and the electrolyzer, so it comes now 50%, but you will see in the future, it is going to be this 60%, 65%, 70%, 80%. It is increasing now. So we are hopeful that it will go to about 85 to 90% in next 15 years time. If that comes in, so it will dominate. And because now we are talking the hydrogen production in a very big way, and also considering the storage also. So then that will dominate in the future, not the batteries.
Right, Singh Saab, I understand that basically it will be the energy intensity of hydrogen production which needs to be looked at very seriously. And if that can be optimized, perhaps then this would be a promising option.
Hydro batteries also the big options is the pump hydro, and already what Mr. V.K. Singh explained. So that is the way to start with that. And if that can also sustain the grid, support the grid, also that extra hydropower can be used to generate hydrogen, and it can be used in different industries in India as well as in the long term for the export also.
Right, sir. Right. So thank you. Before
Prasenjit,
we really, Samal, just a minute.
Yeah.
Samal, just one more question. I think just to get an idea of how much balancing power is available and required in the grid, to sort of get an idea of how much reserve capacity that we are talking about for the purpose of stabilizing the grid. Maybe we could ask Mr. Baba that to give us a little bit of figure of right now, currently, how much of balancing power is available in the grid, and how much would we be looking forward as additional storage capacity? What are the numbers we are talking about broadly, a ballpark figure kind of thing?
It is these numbers are how much you can take is the issue. Of course, our grid code is still in the making. There was an expert committee which gave its recommendations last year, which commission is examining it. See, basically we require three different types of reserves. One is a primary, another is secondary, and then tertiary, to address the variability intermittent. And reserves are to be maintained at different levels, at the state level, at the regional level, and at the national level. So it is not one number. It will be unfair on my part to tell only one number and this is that. It's not like that. So, like to start with, about at the national level, our system should not face any difficulty, even if a largest thermal plant goes or doesn't, has difficulty. Then any transmission system which is leading to a outage of a generator. So something like that. So that should be at the primary and the secondary, we should have that much. Of course, there are limits. What should be maintained at each regional level and what should be, that is also a roadmap to reserves has already been indicated by CERC, of course, way back in 2017. So don't mind that I'm not spelling out the numbers, but that is a principle and the philosophy how we need to maintain and reserves. So we have to, and very different time frames. That is the issue. here, I would like to say. And that can be maintained only through resource adequacy at every level. So that is the first and foremost issue, is that ultimately the load serving entities are the people who have to maintain, our responsibility to maintain their portfolio and keep certain reserves. Of course, in the event of this new regime of renewables, yes, everyone have to have that, because it is a variable and intermittent. Everything cannot be at one place.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Thank you so much.
Continuing with this, Prasanjit, you see, there is a definitely variability with the solar energy and the renewable energy. To some extent, this variability can be neutralized. For example, you see, sun doesn't have any holiday or doesn't have any break time, something like that. Always it is glowing. If it is not available in India, maybe available in the US. And as I said, this Vasudhaya Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family. So can we have, or the global leaders think in that terms and have a global grid instead of individual grids in the country, and have solar energy 365 days and 24/7 solar energy? This may be a question to Mr. Sarma.
Sir, you must have heard that ISA has already announced, Honorable PM said from the stage that one sun, one globe, and one
sun, one world, one grid.
One grid.
OSWOG.
Yeah. So that is the theme, and with that we can always go forward and think forward that solar is never ending this thing. It is somewhere, sometime it is visible. So we can harness the energy emitted out of rays, and we can 24/7 we can supply energy to various parts of the world, provided we are interlinked. So that is the slightly challenging issue, how to connect it. But wherever we are in the landlocked kind of a situation, we need not to cross sea. We can always connect it, and we can supply that and harness that energy.
Anything is being done in that direction?
Right now, I should say no, in my knowledge.
Let me, if you don't, please don't mind, I'm interjecting.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Actually, in International Solar Alliance, ISA, have recently constituted a consultancy assignment. EDF is working on it. So sorry, Sanjay ji. So I just basically is that under OSWOG, India is taking lead, a lot of lead, and ISA also is taking part in it. And very recently, maybe a few months ago, EDF was given the task of working out the preliminary study. So we are all eagerly looking forward to that study.
Can I also add something here?
Yes, please.
Actually, this one sun, one world, and one grid idea was given in 1989 in Japan. I was attending the World Congress there, and that idea came from that time. And but I can just to let you know, there's a project here in Australia, and we are planning to connect this underwater cable to Singapore. So that is called the Asian Hub project. So if it is one of the example of that, and that may happen in different countries and different ways. So that is possible, not now, but could be, you can see in 30, 40, 50 years. Yes, the number of countries will be connected through the cables.
Yeah. Actually, we are running out of time now.
Yeah, we are virtually running out of time. I think we can ask some question to Mr. Jha. I think Jha Sahab has been there. Maybe we can test his voice a little bit.
Yeah, as coming to that, you see, as we have already discussed, this renewable energy alone cannot sustain the grid, cannot be self-sufficient with this present technological advancements like storage and all those things. And solar has to, this thermal has to be there at least for a decade or so in the future. So, Mr. Jha, how do you see the future of these plants, and how do you conceive this to fund this? Because they are all already under stress. The lot of stress is there in thermal sector, specifically in India, and more renewable again induces more stress on it. How do you see the future?
Thank you, Samal. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible.
Okay. So the first thing which you said is that the 10-year or so, the future of thermal. I don't agree with you. The future of thermal in this country is going to be for another 40 years or so. And the basis is that when you are talking about 450 gigawatt of renewable energy, today you have 100 gigawatt and you are only meeting 10% of the energy requirement. Now, if assume that your energy requirement is not increasing, although it is a hypothetical case, it will increase every year, 5%, 6%, whatever it is. But assuming that it is not increasing, then in order to meet 100% of energy requirement, you need 100 into 10, 1000 gigawatt. Now, if you are talking about that there should be green hydrogen or there should be battery storage, then you need another, because this 1000 is available only for 8 hours in a day, or then for balance 16 hours. And if you're going to have the battery storage, which needs to be charged with the solar, then you need that much capacity of solar, which will only do the charging business during the daytime. So that is another aspect. So if you look at in the larger context, then probably the thermal is going to stay there for a much longer period than what we can all think of. The only problem is the balancing nature of the power. That is why I was interested in knowing that with hydro, if hydro is able to chip in as a balancing requirement when the solar goes down, it is very good. But I don't know whether Mr. Baba can tell exactly that when the solar goes down, how much of power is coming from the hydro and how much is thermal plant, because then at least you can reduce the cyclic operation of the thermal plant, which is probably very high at the present juncture. So, and my nuclear component is presently 3% energy, and at the rate with the capacity is being added, 11 units of 700 megawatt, which will come progressively, I don't see nuclear going beyond 4%. And there is another problem of nuclear fuel supply. So that is that part. So the thermal plant will have to keep on doing the balancing job. And therefore, for a sustainable world, it is very important that we must concentrate more on the carbon capture and uses rather than anything else. Even if you look at the battery storage, the lithium ion, the resources are very limited in the world. The lithium reserves and the cobalt reserves are very limited, and they are not capable of meeting the entire present energy demand of the world, if you consider all the resources available in the world. And second thing is that 90% of these are owned by China now. It has already acquired those assets. And the way China is behaving in the geopolitical scenario, it may not be advisable to go for lithium-ion battery in a big way. So probably the iron, sulfur iron, and other research which is going on, they have to be proven in a larger, greater scale. But what I'm trying to say is that on the other side, you see the climate change is already there. It is happening. Now, whatever we are doing, is it too little, too late? We do not know exactly. But what is alternative? So the only alternative is that you cannot remove the coal. You cannot get the battery overnight. You cannot have 1,000 gigawatt of renewable energy overnight. So we will have to see that how can we use the fossil fuel or replace it with the biofuel, what we are trying to do in NTPC, 10% of biofuel we are trying to use. Then we are trying to do the carbon capture and converting that to a methanol. If we can have the carbon cycle, which we are talking about, the cyclic, this thing.
Circular economy.
Yes, yeah. Then circular economy, then that could be more viable option. Particularly if you look at the kind of commitment which were made in COP21 one in Paris, the kind of fund which was to flow from developed countries to developing countries. It never came. The technology is supposed to be without IPR. It never happened. So with the technological barrier and the limitation of financial resources with a developed country and developing countries like us, it may not be feasible to totally replace the coal power. So we should concentrate more on the hydropower and the coal power with carbon capture.
Yes, sir. You are right, sir. The coal is going to be there for at least maybe 4 decades or 30 years or 40 years.
Definitely.
So the solution is maybe the carbon capture. Due to want of time, we could not discuss much. But at the end, I would like to ask Mr. Carter whether this carbon, as Mr. Jha said, this is a circular economy, capture the carbon and utilize it for synthesizing other chemicals or maybe liquid fuels, and again fire it, or like in circular economy. How do you see the future of this, and what is the vision? I mean, the horizon of this circular economy as far as the technology is concerned?
Thank you again for a very good question. So if we look at hydrogen, renewables, and energy storage in the same context and look at them as different pathways towards net zero, renewables will eventually take over and green hydrogen will supplement where we have excess renewable generation. But we have also important sectors and from a decarbonization point of view, the sectors where molecules are necessary, right? So from a Norwegian perspective, gas is and will be working as a transition fuel in the road to net zero. And in our quest for the Norwegian energy industries to supply zero carbon energy, CCS, or carbon capture and storage, will be important. And not only as a measure for reducing emissions from our oil and gas production, we will reduce our emissions from oil and gas production with 50% by 2030. That is the goal. And other industry processes. And also the production of blue hydrogen. But also as a business case, right? By selling storage capacity on the continental shelf, and also adding the U to CCS, right? By developing business opportunities within the utilization of carbon. And I am frankly very encouraged to see new promising companies that are emerging in this space by using technologies to produce like carbon nanofiber and utilizing CO2 as a raw material. And CCS is not new, it is proven technology. It has been used for many years. We have captured and re-injected carbon on the Norwegian shelf since the mid-90s. So green hydrogen works well where renewable power is cheap and abundant. But I think that the scale of hydrogen is not enough to decarbonize the molecular sector. And in that context, I think that carbon capture and storage, blue hydrogen, will be very important still in the years to come.
Yeah, okay. So we have to wrap up. We don't have much time now. We have to wrap up. There are a couple of questions from the audiences, but I think we have already discussed all those issues during this discussion. Prasenjit, may I wrap up the discussion and close it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've had a very vigorous discussion and a lot of interesting points have come up. And I believe the bottom line remains is that while we pursue a broad pathway to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C by 2020, which is the scenario which has been projected by IEA and IRENA and other concerned organizations, I believe the issue or the challenge that will remain is that while all the countries are willing to follow this path, the only limitation or challenge will come in terms of availability of technical know-how and the necessary economic framework of finances to support it. So that, I believe, would be the challenge. And while the challenge is being addressed through various means, including market interventions and policy guidelines and regulatory frameworks, so we, in the near future, at least for the next 10 to 20 years, we would necessarily have to follow a hybrid path, which means we have a little bit of coal, a little bit of renewables, a little bit of hydro, nuclear, and try to ramp up all the non-carbon sources of energy in such a way that we are able to achieve the overall target of reducing the carbon footprint. I think that is the kind of way forward that comes out from this discussion. And storage technology definitely will improve and evolve. And while geopolitical situations do remain, and as I said at the very beginning, that while the survival of mankind is the central question, perhaps the brotherhood of mankind will have to transcend the sovereignty of nations, and the one world, one sun, one grid perhaps is a vision that would have to come through in the future. I think we've had a lovely discussion, and I would like to thank all our panelists who've joined us and shared their views with us on this platform. And I'm sure over the next few days, as we discuss these issues in independent sessions, we would definitely come to a more conclusive action plan for a way forward, again, on the hybrid mode. Thank you all so very much for joining us for this panel discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.